the pale blue dot.
All right, Michael.
Good day, how you going?
Very
Nice
well.
to meet you, Tom.
Yes, you too.
Welcome.
You too. Thanks so much for having me here. It's good. I was saying before that
my
the
pleasure.
globe saved my ass there with the
It
podcast.
really helps. You know, it's quite bright, isn't it? I haven't got my sunglasses, but that'll be okay.
I know. It's almost like I could
Yeah.
get a bloody tan
Yeah,
from it. I think.
Yeah.
Mate, yeah. Thanks so much for doing the podcast.
That's all right.
If you could start us off a little bit with just a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and give the listeners a guide as to kind of where the conversation's going to flow.
Sure. Well, my name is Michael Burge. I'm a counselling psychologist, but I'm also a psychodrama director. So I've trained in both areas, and of course they interrelate. And while I work in psychology in general areas, work relations, I've specialised particularly in post-traumatic stress since my time as a Veterans Affairs psychologist at the Repatriation and Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service going back to the late 80s. And been in private practice probably since about 1994, I suppose. So it's a fair while.
Yeah.
Time goes fast, mate.
Yeah. Well, I was born in '93.
93, well, there you go. That's really the time I started in private practice.
Yeah. That's right.
So when you're in a field that you enjoy doing and there's a lot of community involvement and there's so many people you get to meet, different networks, time goes very quickly. You'll find that out.
Yeah.
But that's what it's all about, really. And look, I've worked it's just really taken me into so many places and met so many different people, so many people from different walks of life and organisations and institutions. It's been very, very interesting. So very different from my time before that, where I was actually a TAFE teacher, teaching for a few years in electronics, and then I gravitated to media with script writing for radio and television, teaching that, and did some time, very briefly, with industrial lease with Radio Australia and Southern Community Radio, but then I decided to leave that field, lecturing, teaching, and go into psychology. So, and here I am today.
Yeah.
So
So why did you feel like you felt that need to go into psychology? What was driving that?
well, what came to when I was doing my teacher training at the local teacher training institute, Hawthorn Institute of Education, we have to do called educational psych, and I did quite well at that and got interested in that, and I was encouraged by the lecturers actually to go think about going into psychology.
Yeah.
So I just continued to study part time while I was teaching for all those years. Going back into the right through the 80s.
Yes.
So there it was.
Look, I think I'm a bit biased when I say that. I think there's nothing more important than
That's
the
not
mind.
bad. You're allowed to be biased.
I'm not allowed to be biased. It's my own show. I say what I want.
That's not incorrect.
Very true. Very true. But I just don't think there's anything more important than understanding, these things that all kind of come back to the mind, like how to be happier with yourself and find meaning and purpose and live a life that, as you just said before, where time flies because you're doing things that you enjoy all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our activity in the environment and is very important to helping us understand ourselves. I mean, our journey from the time we're born is perhaps to understand ourselves. And you look at that in terms of healing, but you look at that in terms of human development, really. And of course, there's so many different ways, so many different fields of psychology that look at that differently. Some fields will look at it as a term of, well, you're not happy because you have a pathology. Others would have a look at that as more of an existential journey, like more intertwined with philosophy and the arts.
Yes.
So more holistic, So that's probably more the sort of area that I would be focusing on, a holistic type, an integrative approach to helping the person develop and whatever particular wounds that need to be healed along the way, or we can look at those too. But so it's a journey. So to get away from the idea that we're flawed individuals because we are suffering here and suffering there. Everyone suffers. I mean, I'm a Collingwood supporter, and you understand. I've suffered a lot for it.
Suffered a lot, mate.
Unfair decisions.
Traumatic.
Anyway, last year's grand final, but we won't go into that. We're talking about other people's journeys, not mine. But
Very true. Trauma is subjective, though.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We don't want to get caught up with black and white thinking.
Yes.
There we are.
Well, yes. Pardon the pun.
So yeah. So I think development and the existential journey, but within that too is, and I found especially in recent years, working with the survivors of Black Saturday, running some programs out there and around Marysville, King Lake area for a couple of years, bringing the communities together, the way that which communities and way people can help each other, not just necessarily that expert providing that service, is just so important in the journey.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at things.
Definitely, because God, I've got a lot of questions bumping in through my body now. Right now. What was interesting with Freud's work was that he kind of said, you know, when people start questioning their life, that's when there's a pathology kind of ruminating and needs to be understood.
Right,
but do you know, I think it's important at various stages in your life to actually look at yourself and reflect and think about what you're doing. And
Sure, I mean, the ancient philosophers would probably perhaps have a different point of view than Freud in that way. They just said looking at self-reflection. Aristotle, Aristotle, Socrates, etc. Would say self-reflection is a part of understanding the world and our relationship with ourselves and others and the world. And that's part of what's important for our own growth, but also the growth of humans in general. We can't have some introspection.
Yes.
And that may involve some troubles here and there, or some hurt, or some pain, or some trauma. That's all part of it.
Bringing it up,
70% of people have been traumatised. The research shows that.
Wow.
Even though 10% in the general population have a post-traumatic stress ongoing, 70% of us have experienced some kind of traumatic event at some stage in our lives.
So what would the definition of trauma be there, given that it is so subjective?
Well, when you talk about the definition of trauma, I guess we draw on psychology, we draw on the various diagnostic manuals, of course, but it's pretty much what it comes down to is that it's the shock involved around being exposed to potentially a life-threatening circumstances to yourself or others, especially others that you are close to in some way or another, a significant other. When you see your significant other's life at threat or emotional and physical integrity at threat, that can be a very traumatic experience naturally, because our fight kicks in and our protective aspects kick in to try and help rescue and save. And that massive boost of adrenaline for helping our loved ones or ourselves to survive creates the, if you like, the traumatic type domain, whereby we're so focused on surviving that, and we can draw in all sorts of energy, lots of other emotions like terror and horror, and other parts of the trauma experience can get shut out of conscious awareness for a time, and perhaps sometimes indefinitely, but then unfortunately that's part of the problem, because all that sort of adrenaline and chemistry is floating around in our body, and our experiences has been fragmented rather than flowing. That's what causes the traumatic stress symptoms later on.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
So you can kind of see how, even just based on your terminology, then, like, you know, aspects of the psyche fragmented and not flowing. You can see how people develop these, what we would call disorders, like, you know, dissociative disorders like ADHD and psychosis and things, but they're really essentially survival strategies.
Survival, that's right. So the symptoms are a result of just like being in a big, you know, fight to the death of something, you know, rocks and knives or guns or whatever, that you might get a few wounds, but then you've actually survived. And the wounds are actually obvious in those circumstances, but the psychological wounds are less obvious. A lot of the Vietnam veterans and other veterans that I work with, for example, would describe the experience when they're engaged in combat as though they're actually so focused on surviving, they feel like they're in a tunnel.
Right.
Everything else is shut out of conscious awareness, and they feel almost like there are two selves. One self in action in combat, the other self watching themselves from above, and they get that experience of watching themselves from above. That's that sort of dissociative removal of other parts of self while the survivor is at work. So,
Right.
And when we come back to healing, it's a matter of trying to find ways to integrate those other parts of self that have been left floating out there, different parts, integrate them.
See, and that really fascinates me, because when you think of someone describing a dream, you think of how they say, oh, you know, I was doing this and this, but then at the same time, you're kind of watching yourself doing this. And it just kind of describes what you were saying with that traumatic response.
Yes, that's it. That's a good example of that.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
So how do dreams then? Because if that's a very similar, you know, those two sides of things have similarities then, because PTSD sufferers often have recurring nightmares as well.
Yes.
How do those two kind of correspond?
Well, that's part of the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress is, does someone have nightmares, recurring nightmares? And the explanation, generally speaking, there's probably general agreement across fields, whether it's psychoanalysis or whether it's cognitive behavioural therapy or whether it's psychodrama or Gestalt.
Yes.
Whatever it happens to be, most people would agree that the dream world or the dream life is an attempt for the individual in their unconscious mind to try and integrate the wounds that have taken place. So there's an natural attempt, once one's been traumatized, to assimilate the trauma, to process the trauma. The trauma has been described as being caught up very much in the right hemisphere of the brain and parts of the body, and wants to process through to the left hemisphere, more the verbal.
Yeah.
So there's sort of, the trauma's kept in that part of the system, the amygdala and the right hemisphere, and wants to process. And the dream, when you're sleeping, when you're perhaps dropping your defences somewhat, that's the time it starts to try and reenact the trauma so you can then process it. Unfortunately, because it's so terrifying, sometimes people wake up and they get caught in the loop.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes why they need to do a particular type of journey, sometimes psychotherapy, wherever that happens to, whatever psychotherapy they do utilise. So in psychodrama, you bring the dream out to life and you get people to enact
Really?
groups. Yes, there's that you in that situation, there's that person over there that's trying to shoot you or stab you or something, or trying to humiliate you, or if it's a rape victim, the same thing. And you bring the various parts out, and we've got a whole lot of chairs over there and cushions. Sometimes if you're doing one-on-one, you can't, different from groups.
Yes.
Others called auxiliaries to act out. The cushions are the auxiliaries, and that's very powerful to help people integrate that part, and they can then start to process the dream, start to process a lot more.
Wow,
and
that is
and their
fascinating.
trauma disappears
Yes.
sometimes.
So that's psychodrama.
Psychodrama, very powerful, very powerful. But most of the approaches, it just depends on which one fits what individual.
Yeah.
Some people got a very artistic, creative bent, and they can just fall right into psychodrama. Sometimes people that aren't particularly role play orientated are locked into verbal. Sometimes it's useful for them to take them to a bit of creative energy, but not too much, just a bit here and there. So that's all fits into the idea of helping that person process the trauma that might be displayed in the dream world.
So they would come to you, for example, and they would say, I keep having this dream in a roundabout way, because obviously the dream manifests symbols from all different sorts of angles and things. But essentially, this is the plot of the dream always, and then I wake up in a fright. Is the idea then to essentially try to change the unconscious from reacting in a fearful way to reacting in a more observational way? Or
Yes. So that generally speaking, that's the way to go. You move towards the observation. It's like mindfulness, but in action. So in psychodrama, it's called mirroring. So you might have two or three selves at once. So you move a person to a safe place in the present, 2019, and that might have been, the trauma might have happened, say, like in 2015, and you separate the time and the space. So where the trauma is happening, you can see some enactment taking out there, but you can always bring them back to 2019 very quickly if they're overwhelmed. So it's very important to treat carefully with that, because you don't want to overexpose someone to the traumatic material. So there are different views on that. There's a technique, and you might, since you're in the area, you understand prolonged exposure. They sort of take you through the images of the trauma quite confrontingly, and that works for a lot of people. But then for a lot of people that are perhaps even more severe traumatised, not necessarily. So they've got to be sort of more sort of piecemeal, steady, backwards and forwards, build up safety, and just have the trauma at a distance. But they can still process that vicariously.
Yes.
And Gestalt psychodrama is very powerful for that EMDR.
EMDR. This is fascinating. This is that rapid eye movement.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, basically, it's got to do with a bit like talking about dream states, a bit like the way in which when you're dreaming, your eyes can move backwards and forwards. Have you ever watched yourself when you're dreaming? No,
not necessarily.
I haven't achieved that. But sometime.
I'm sure you will eventually.
One day they'll be. Just give Collingwood a premiership this year. I'll think about that. Mate.
Yes, exactly. Your eyes will be darting all over.
That's right. Black and white. Anyway, look, pretty much the idea is that it helps stimulate and process that part of the brain that allows the information that's been sort of non-verbal, fragmented in the right hemisphere, processed through to the left hemisphere. So it's a matter of helping it. The eyes moving helps stimulate the brain to process things.
Wow.
It's like winding up the car. You wouldn't know that it's too young, winding up the car manually. In fact, I'm too young. But I had a few old cars when I was about 18, but they used to wind up the crank.
You're talking about Hot Wheels, aren't you?
That's it. So I can wind up these days with my mates when I'm around the golf course. But anyway, when you stimulate the eyes, get the eyes to move backwards and forwards, that gets the brain then to help process from right hemisphere to left hemisphere.
Mm.
But also, even within that, I'm a former president of the EMDR Association in Victoria, back in the early 90s, to sort of late 90s era. At that time, there was while there was some emphasis on eclectic cognitive interweave, and finding in recent times, when I say recent, the last 10 years, it's been so important to perhaps be more holistic and integrative, especially for dissociative identity disorders and things like this, highly dissociative, highly complex trauma, to bring in other techniques like psychodrama, like art therapy, to help develop what's called a positive resource. So for those approaches, there's a need for duty of care in terms of not being overly too much trauma focus.
Yeah.
The person hasn't got the resources, the childhood abuse, childhood trauma, they might not even know they've had a child. They might have an adult. I've had this time and time again. They come here for an adult car accident, unfortunate rape as a young woman, but then there's some earlier childhood abuse that took place that then come forward that they weren't expecting. So you need to be very careful with and have the capacity to test out that person's ability to process current trauma and trauma focus in general. Yeah.
So how would that child trauma come up? Because it's a very for people that aren't in the field, it sounds almost something fictional, that you can be having these conversations and be acting out these traumas, and all of a sudden from somewhere, people in the psychedelic sphere, spiritual sphere, they say like, oh, of course. I remember a time when back I was 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. I found out I was, as you say, like raped or molested, or I had a car accident, or how would that just come to mind?
Well, they could experience something somatically that they weren't experiencing before. They could be experiencing an emotion they weren't experiencing before. So, and in EMDR, you might just get them to focus on that, whatever's emerging, and then I think the modalities, the body sensations, any thoughts, images, emotions, and from that, images could pop up from earlier times. Yeah. And so that's not necessarily saying it's repressed memory. It might be a memory they had, but they have a different experience of that memory.
Yes.
So they could come out unexpectedly sometimes.
Wow.
It's just like, if you start having a conversation with somebody, there's long-term memory and there's short-term memory, and you start talking about something which is a short-term event, you think, oh, that reminds me of, that time, when I was doing this or doing that, et cetera, et cetera. So the long-term memory can be triggered, but then when there's potential trauma floating around that's starting to be processed, then the emotionality and the significance that can be seen or experienced in a different way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a matter of repressed memory coming forward, and it could be just a different experience of an old memory that they didn't actually give much value to until that time.
Yep. And how would people be able to tell within themselves if they have experienced trauma when they think of a memory or it floods a certain emotion? Like,
well, I think the PTSD guidelines are pretty good on that. I mean, if you've got a range of symptoms, that's not a bad guide, actually, especially dissociation.
Yeah.
Because association is, apart from the flashbacks are upsetting, panic attacks are upsetting, the OCD stuff is annoying, irritating, everyone's got a bit of all those, by the way.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Touch wood. But anyway, so, but the dissociation is the most damaging. That's the one that, in my view, when you're actually feel your whole emotions shut down. This is not even talking DOD. We're talking about just dissociative experience of actually shutting out your emotions. Depersonalization, derealization, where you actually feel like a robot or a zombie.
Yeah.
You're at a party, everyone's having a good time, but you're just flat as a tack. Flat as a board. You can't really respond to that.
Yeah.
You feel as though you're outside of yourself, and no joy, just not even no fear or terror. If you start to move into fear or terror or joy or happiness or anger, that's probably an improvement.
At least there's something
happening.
Yes.
And that's where people get most. I think most in danger of suicidal ideation and things like that. In that horrible space, and the rationality is not there. The logic is not there too, because once people are in that space, I think there's no escape. It's never going to get out of it. It's a bit like facing death.
Yep.
I think it's probably what it comes down to in some way, or major violation of some kind.
Yeah.
And often there's heavy stuff, in the background while things go on, which are upsetting. Your footy team loses, you don't get the job you want, that sort of stuff. The controversy around the last few minutes of the grand final, Western Australia.
You sound very traumatised here, Mike.
I won't go into that petition, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But anyway, you probably heard about that. But anyway,
Yes.
change.org. But anyway, probably something deeper pain in there somewhere that's so scary and frightening that the system is very protective.
Yeah.
And wide association is very unpleasant. That's part of the protection. You could even argue almost overprotection. It's like someone who's been brought up and experienced child abuse, especially from a caregiver, and that can be very subtle how that takes place. They can give up on the idea that they have a right to be annoyed at their caregiver, or the caregiver is unjust because if they're relying on their caregiver, the nurturer, for their survival. Catch-22. So they blame themselves, they feel shame more, and they think it's all their fault. So they get that sort of that scenario where they're actually, in that catch-22 scenario, so just to try and survive as a child. So a child at 0 onwards has these amazing capacities to fit in with the caregiver, even though they're, abusive, sexually abusive, physically abusive. Especially psychologically, the particular focus on psychological abuse, always blaming the victim, sort of stuff.
Yes.
So that could all fit in there, and that can be very, very scary stuff to look at in adulthood, even when you're not relying on that caregiver anymore. And it's like, you get developmental trauma and attachment issues, and it can all come out. And it's particularly notable when you start to have relationships. And attachments are at stake, and you start to get into a situation where you're feeling vulnerable. You can feel yourself, being all shaken up, and the dissociative experiences come in emotional vulnerability, intimacy is very threatening. That opens you up to the things you might not be quite tuned into that happened in childhood with another important significant other.
Yeah, and I think another thing to consider is that children are so innocent, and when something traumatic happens to them, I guess one of the best survival strategies they can do is internalize that experience and claim it as their own fault or something, because at least they have some
that's the thing. Yeah, that's a survival mechanism. That's what happens, and it's almost automatic. So they just have sort of a biological way of surviving in a way. They don't necessarily think I must go from A to B to C. It just sort of happens to fit into to be in the good books with the perpetrating caregiver.
Exactly. Yeah, to keep it because at least they can understand the experience, and they can. So, do you think that's why then people that go into self-mutilation, self-harm disorders, it kind of emanates from that ability to at least control something?
Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure. Absolutely. It's also and the research is quite abundant in that area that's part of it. They can control something. Sometimes they have other ways of getting back at the.
That makes sense. Yes.
And they sort of, but also when they're particularly in a state of panic and frenzy, or just severe dissociation, that's because that adrenaline kick can sometimes sort of snap them out of it. Not in a
yes.
A great way, not a good way of doing that. That can be used for that method as well. To try and the pain or the adrenaline from that.
Yeah. Can
snap them out of that dissociative or help move them away from that horrible state that they're in.
Yeah. So, I mean, ironically, that's almost like it's the intention behind that's good because you're getting out of this and into this.
Yeah.
But there are more productive ways to do that: high intensity training, breathing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, how much of that sort of holistic approach do you integrate with your own clients?
All the time.
Yeah.
So I pretty much have a core of cognitive approaches, and I integrate some psychodrama techniques and EMDR, art therapy sometimes. Generally speaking, whatever modality I think is suitable for a particular client.
I think it's.
But the relationship is so important. If nothing's going to work unless the relationship, the relationship is over Carl Rogers. Have you heard of Carl Rogers?
Yes, I'm becoming a person.
I'm a fan of Carl Rogers, and the relationship, especially with complex PTSD, abuse survivors, victims of torture. I've also worked with. Whatever you do, whatever advanced tool you have in the bag, if you're not relating well it's not respectful relationship, not putting yourself in too much of a sort of a superior position because you're the expert.
Yeah.
Person to person, that's got to work. So I like the idea of being core based. Carl Rogers with cognitive and some Marino psychodrama.
Okay.
And so it's a bit of art therapy thrown in.
Yeah.
So
I think that's brilliant, and I think one of the big things I want to try to build with this podcast is bridging the gap between not only clients, patients, clients, and psychologists, psychotherapists, etc., but also people that are just starting in the field, because that's where I'm at. I want to learn more about this, and what I think you said there was a really brilliant point that I definitely want to try to take with my approach when I'm working with my clients, is that you're not the superior. Yes, we've studied the mind and all this sort of stuff, but the goal of the session is to help the client. So by definition, they're the expert.
Yes.
Because they're superior in their awareness of themselves.
Yes.
You've got to try to understand and unpack them.
Yes. I totally agree with that. And it's like, we're a witness a lot of the time to their journey. And that can be, and so I like, in terms of psychodramatic terms, the idea of psychodrama methods is to create spontaneity and creativity, and that helps move someone away from dissociation and open up new possibilities. In some ways, it's like they're on a creative journey, and it's like watching someone's artistry at work. And sometimes it can be a bit of co-artistry or co-authoring in that process.
Yes, I like that. So if we get back to trauma, because I really want to, I think trauma really affects a lot of people in more ways than they really think.
Yes.
And a really good analogy that helped me understand trauma a little bit better was, you're kind of walking down a road and then something traumatic happens. It's like this big wall all of a sudden goes up down the road. And, that dissociative occurrence happens when aspects of the psyche kind of split off and they're able to move around the wall and keep walking. But there is an element of the psyche, the total picture, that can't get past that wall, and it's just constantly blocking. And that's, as you grow and develop, anything associated with that traumatic experience triggers you in the present. What are some really good ways that people can learn to integrate that experience into their present conscious awareness?
Well, we start with psychodrama, and actually we're talking about a wall right now. We actually put out a wall.
Oh, yeah.
And we stand behind the wall and we say, well, what's on the other side of that wall? And what are they saying to you?
Really?
Yeah. What are they trying to call you up? So we'd have someone, the other part of the self, or on that wall saying, help, and you help coach that person to say, well, how can you respond to that person on the other side of the wall? And you perhaps get, if you're doing group work, you'd have perhaps 2 or 3 people to be the wall, and the wall would actually speak to you.
Wow,
with like awesome. A Walt Disney thing coming out, where everything's alive, the tree's alive, the wall's alive, and because the way in which the mind works, they can actually. That's the good thing about psychodrama, setting the scene, and is that the aspects of which are difficult to deal with can be sort of projected into all sorts of other people, but also inanimate objects as well. I remember doing attending a workshop of quite a while ago when I was studying undergraduate psychology at a Gestalt, one of the leaders of Gestalt, James Alder, demonstrated about doing some dream work, and I think the wife was sort of having some abuse. I think it might have been domestic abuse of some kind or another, but she just kept battling on regardless and dissociated. And for some reason, she was dreaming of a washing machine, and there was a bit of flint. I think there's some wool or something inside the washing machine that's kept coming up in the dream all the time, and they got someone to be. They had some discussion or some chair work around that flint, and that was part of her disowned part of the self that was being neglected and washed aside. Oh. And then lots of tears when she had that sort of connection. So the emotion started to then become forthcoming. And psychodrama does those sorts of things.
Wow.
As well. So the difficulty sometimes with just being purely verbal in your approach. You can miss out on all that somatic, unconscious material that can come through in all sorts of ways because of the way it's surrounded itself by protective mechanisms. And creativity and spontaneity and those sorts of role reversals can bring that out.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was something that I learnt with my own panic disorder and trying to understand my own anxiety disorders as well. It's like, I could talk with someone and I could listen to exactly what they're saying, but fundamentally these disorders were based in the amygdala. You know, there was
Yeah,
associative disorders.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I could say, hey, I know exactly how I should be responding, but I can't.
Yes, yeah. So for all of a trauma to be processed, it needs to be processed like with the EMDR. It's not a bad model for that in terms of a summary, emotionally, and also bodily,
Mm-hmm.
cognitively, and whatever images are involved in that process as well.
Yep.
So if your trauma is centered in the body, then there needs to be some focus on that. And action methods are great for that. In psychodrama, you might find someone when they're doing a role reversal with the part of the self that's being disowned, for example, by chair work or somebody else playing that part, they might start to experience that pain in their body, and you get the person to focus on that part and use a technique called maximization. So you'd amplify it, and there'd be some help with some auxiliaries, and that can then, there might be some images around that. So while it's there's some somatic connection or somatic distress, you find as you maximize, focus on amplifying that, can go to emotion, or a new image can emerge, even perhaps a long-term image or repressed image can come out from the unconscious material. And that's what that's what needs to happen for that particular person's journey. You know.
Yes. Because the fundamental goal is to make someone feel happier and like they understand it more.
Yeah.
You know, to integrate themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So if there's some emotion and how that's caught up in the body is suppressed, then obviously that needs to be some way of actually processing that.
Yeah.
It may well be that focus becomes a conflict. I want to, but I can't. So then it's just too challenging to bring that out with a person. So with the psychodrama technique, you do the mirror and get two people to play those conflicted parts, or get two chairs where they could observe themselves playing those parts and step back. And of course, the counsellor, the psychodrama director, would play a vital role in helping the coaching, being supportive and alongside that person. So that's support. The doubling, the coaching, it's like having that kind of support you didn't have when you're experiencing awful experiences, and that is just so important in that sort of therapeutic encounter. Yes.
How much of, because when you start thinking about developmental psychology, and I want to be a father in the next couple of years, I just want to think about how I can create the best environment for my children.
Yeah.
How much of it is creating a safe space for them, so that they know that no matter what happens outside of that safe space, they'll always feel welcome back, and they won't experience that rejection that animosity, hostility towards their parental figures.
Yeah. Right. Well, I guess we're talking about if a person has issues in their own background, how do you stop those from swamping your children?
Yeah, I don't want to kind of put that on them. I've got to do my own work.
Yeah. Well, the answer is, I think there's no one answer. There's no utopia, but a good guide is to the more self-aware you are of whatever's an issue and how that plays out behaviourally, like for example, with the Vietnam vets, they would have an issue with anger and explosion, the volcano effect, or just shutting down. So when they understood that they would be that way, especially with particularly vulnerable encounters with the wife or the children, they would have some strategy in place that even though they're feeling like crap, to actually will say, look, it's not you, son, or not you, daughter, or not you, wife. I'm just going for a bad space at the moment. Had a bad day, so look, but we'll catch up in a few minutes. So the main thing is to break that transgenerational link, that thereby they start to think it's their fault.
Yes.
So which might be what the adult is experiencing.
Yes.
Or you're experiencing. When you're a child. So, but when you start to say, well, it's not your fault, I'm just going for a bad thing, that does a hell of a lot of good.
So verbalizing
is like, so if I'm a bit quiet or a bit sort of moody, not your fault, but we'll still do this. I'm really enjoying your company, but even though I can't quite be as up as I am normally.
Yeah.
So articulate without making it too dramatic, just certain passing, So I think that's highly recommended. But and also the quality times too, like the times you're able to enjoy experiences, the times when you can nurture and listen to the child here and there. The big thing also to worry about is being overly worried. that if you actually be overprotective sometimes, overly guilty, or overly, I've got all these issues, so if you're right with the child, I'm happy, therefore it's my fault, So you really got to watch that, because then you can be overprotective too, because kids are pretty resilient, they can actually work it out themselves if it's a generally healthy environment, that something's wrong with daddy or mummy, So get on with this stuff, unless they get beaten up or something.
Yeah.
So
Collingwood losers.
That's no, I'm trying, unless they actually get physically hurt.
Of course, yes.
Then they just work it out. The parents are in a bad mood and so forth and so on. But if they see the parent making an effort and at other times, and not acting too overly protective, they can actually generally work it out and be okay.
Yeah, it becomes like the story of the Buddha, who the prince, his dad built up these incredible walls, getting all the material possessions. Yeah. And he first saw that old man or a dead body or whatever it was. He ran back and screaming because it was just so unprepared to have that carpet pulled out from underneath.
Yeah. That's a good analogy, actually.
Yeah. I mean, you can think back, across your own life, and the first couple of times you were exposed to potentially uncomfortable truths when you kicked out of the Garden of Eden, essentially, and you have those moments of like, oh. It takes a while to recognise that that's a part of life as well.
That's a part of life. Disappointment is a part of life.
Yes.
Injustice is a part of life.
Yes.
I used to play footy. I used to do a lot of pennant golf, and one year I didn't make the team for some reason. There's a bit of politics involved. Anyway, that's my story. Yeah. Either way, it's very disappointing. So that's just
That's what happens.
That's life. That's what happens. You don't always make the team, do you?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So sometimes you're on the bench.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hopefully not too much. But
that's right. Yeah.
So how much of this work? I love Dr. Sue Johnson. She does that emotionally focused therapy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times, like exactly what you said before, that people get stuck, is that talk therapy becomes the only avenue for growth, and a lot of this stuff is caught in the body, and when we react to things, it's a physical reaction, an emotional reaction, and then the what ifs start to stir. How important is it? Because I'm always just trying to think of things that we can do ourselves. To actually get into the body, and what are some other things that you would recommend for people?
Well, look, I think mindfulness, meditation, just sitting with the pain and just see what pops up. Body work of some kind or another. There's, I think Bessel van der Kolk is a big advocate for that also.
He loves yoga.
Yoga and also body work. Sort of there are various techniques that can actually help the person focus on it. EMDR, of course, where there's a big focus on whatever the body is actually experiencing. So, and I guess the techniques of psychodrama and so forth, they do a lot of focus on the body, and how that is symbolised. So, art therapy.
Oh yeah,
that can be very useful. So if they're feeling a pain, and they can't process it from their body, using some creative processes to try and transduce that pain into some other medium like art. Very powerful.
Because I think
the different perspectives of pain, through the creative processes.
Yeah. It's it is hard to sit in that pain sometimes, especially when you're just beginning to swim into the unconscious waters, But I reckon something that's really helped me anyway, and I'd love for you to comment on it as well, is that these things that happen to us are happening for us. Like, yes, that happened to us 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago or whatever. But all of these what ifs, these physical sensations just because we're socially conditioned to believe they're not good, they're happening for us because they're trying, the body is trying to survive and stay alive and make us feel good.
Yes.
How many people get stuck, do you think, really, in thinking that I just want this to go away?
Well, I think that's a huge part of psychotherapy. We're talking about the meta worry aspect, really. So in my work with clients, I spend a lot of time on that aspect.
Right.
That the people sort of are down themselves, are being down, and that of course ties into this. It's almost like the pathological critic, but worse than that, you're being criticised for having one.
Yeah. It's a double.
So you can really work on that, and just when they start to map that, especially when you can start to do some positive resourcing, hopefully there are some, Vanderkolk really highlights this. I remember meeting him one time back in 1990 when he was doing some work with the veteran psychologists, that it's so important to, if you've got some positive role models in your life, you can really drag in those role models at those times when you try and deal with that meta worry, that the critic of the critic, for having a critic sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you've got that, you can really contrast that, and just take people back to view that, whether it's manifesting in the body, like, you know, if someone had a somatic gnawing of the body of some kind or another, you want that person to experience that, but then also get a view of themselves experiencing that. If you're being, for the meta example before, if you're being criticised for that, get a view of them criticising themselves for suffering.
Yes.
And then you probably pretty much, you know, if there's some childhood trauma, you could actually tie that in. And this is it's like in a child work in a way, you could tie that into, well, did you have that sort of thing going any way or form, you know, when you mentioned about, you know, this happening, that happening, when you know, that teacher or this teacher when you were 10 or something, and he tied you off for crying or something, you know, into the double bar and stuff. And they start to when you start to make those connections, especially, but even in the present, it's still powerful. That can be especially potent and progressive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, getting that caught in that double bind.
Yeah.
You know, you shouldn't feel like you're doing this, and it increases the shame and the.
Yeah. So you're right. Look, you know, it's so important not to beat yourself up for being beaten up or suffering. But then at the same time, it probably highlights there's a conflict there, and that's useful material. We could bring that conflict out.
Yep.
So if it's not progressing, I mean, you don't blame yourself. It's part of life, part of overcoming what we need to overcome as part of our existential journey. But then, how then do you transform that into something that can be progressive for you?
Yes.
So we're not talking about if you've got a symptom, say it's an experience of discomfort. So, well, that's just part of life. Just got to put up with it. If you've got a broken foot, if you've got a torn hammy,
Yeah.
oh well. It's just life. You know, you don't have to go to the doctor or the surgeon. Just put up with it. You know.
Yeah.
We don't want that. You know, we don't want to be criticised for, you know, tackling Penalty or something like that. You know, you should never. Don't try that, mate. You just very well, like, you know. But anyway, you say, well, hang on. You don't have to wear that as a badge of honour. Either. You don't. It just happens. Don't blame yourself for it. You're adventurous. You're courageous. You went for it. Right? You had a go. Right? But now, then, how can we then use that to for healing?
Yeah, that's so true. That really ties into some of the teachings that I've got from the Eastern philosophies. You know, Buddhism, Hinduism is just don't necessarily, you know, wrap this up in a package of negativity and wrap this up in a package of positivity, and then constantly try to move over here and try to find that, because they're relative based on each other.
Yeah. So there's a sort of a yin and yang there somewhere, isn't there? You know.
Yeah, you can't win. The more you try to well, okay, if you want to tie this back to psychotherapy, the happier you try to get, the more obvious all the bad things in your life are going to be, because you know you're trying to run here all the time.
Yeah, sure, yeah, that's right. So if you're thinking, if you say, look, you know, I've got this idea of the shoulds and the must be happy.
Yes.
That's self-criticalness in itself.
Yes.
That's, you know, it's the idea is that you should always be in a happy place, apart from trauma. Is a real problem. Maybe a societal thing in some ways. You know, just having different moods, just part of life, really.
Yeah.
In some ways. That's obviously if there's a traumatic element around that, or a condition of some kind. Sure, okay, let's look at that. But then let's look at the normal aspects of too. So let's not get into over pathology.
Yeah. With trauma then, and you know, people that get triggered, and whether we like to say it or not, we all kind of get triggered with different sorts of things. Is the goal with trauma therapy to move to a place where those things no longer trigger us? Is that possible?
Oh, well, I think that's an ideal goal.
Right.
But I think it's realistically it's a matter of reducing those triggers and reducing the thing that you were talking about the meta aspect, about blaming yourself, getting hard on yourself. So ironically, it's sort of a bit of a paradox around that, but the more you can sort of say, well, hang on, this is just part of the trauma, and this is a symptom, and I'll try and reduce them, not by being down on myself, because that's part of it. People get down on themselves, they get overly scared, saying they're going to be attacked.
I've noticed that definitely with my own experience. The shame comes
very quickly. So when you can actually move that person around more to a sort of a self-nourisher, and say, well, that's just part of the symptom, part of the condition. It's like normalising, really. When we say normalising, that's half the work.
Yes.
So the next thing is, and when they say, well, that's a symptom, they know it's a symptom, and it's normal. It's a trauma is going back to the DSM-3 definition, a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
That's right. So that's one of the first definitions in the DSMs. A normal reaction. I still like it. I think they.
It's brilliant.
Changed that around, but with the veterans in the early days, especially the Vietnam vets and other veterans, just going the concept in itself about that they weren't alone. It's a normal reaction to trauma. Is a normal reaction to highly abnormal circumstances, and there's probably very few people in the world, especially if you amped up the trauma.
Yes,
it's not going to be traumatized, maybe 100%.
Wow.
So I know 70% of the general population would say, hypothetically, in extreme circumstances, he's not going to be traumatized.
Yeah, of course.
Even James Bond. I don't know.
He's pretty good, but yeah.
Yeah. So because one's traumatized, one fragments, one isolates, removes from themselves, they feel like, and they face death. That's part of it. Like when you're about to face death or face a horrible emotional obliteration, it's like leaving with the world. So, and that's a very lonely experience. So, but when you realise that other people have the same experiences, that reduces that loneliness, and you see you have a connection automatically with others that you don't know about, that are also experiencing that, and that's dramatically healing in the first couple of weeks. I found with a lot of people I work with, especially certain groups, rape victims.
Yes, definitely.
So that ties into that, and the actual triggers, you work on the triggers and identifying them and reducing them, and there's very, very subtle ones too, like going into like JB or something and being triggered. I've had someone that was actually chased by somebody wearing a balaclava once, an attempt to assault or rape or something, going into a place like JB, Harvey Norman, what would be in there to make them have a panic attack. So when we analyse that, we look at some of the various devices that had speakers, the two speakers close together. One of those devices reminded them of the balaclava, the eyes.
Wow.
So when you start to get into that, triggers went away.
Wow.
And they were able to understand it. So it's the connection. Another fellow was veteran, was an undersea, it's called a clearance diver in Vietnam, worried about being attacked by one of the enemy. They have these sort of frogman type, like in James Bond, it actually happens.
Oh yeah.
And one day it's all very dark under there, checking for bombs and so forth. This knife comes straight at him, and it wasn't. It was a ship's propeller.
I see.
So, but then, how's that relate to day-to-day experiences? Well, you're actually walking through crowded places. You wonder, is there somebody that's carrying something that's going to stab you with that? You're not necessarily consciously connecting with that, but when you make that connection, you find that being in a bus or crowded circumstance doesn't worry you anymore when you make that connection to the original trauma.
Yeah, you just bring it back.
Triggers, it doesn't mean the original material around that first place trauma has gone away, but that the triggers can be diminished.
Yes.
And that's something to work on then with the actual original trauma too. So the inanimate, the unusual can be very, very important and triggers too, not just the obvious. Like if you're walking, if someone's been raped in a park and they walk into a park, they have a panic attack. Well, that's an obvious trigger.
Very, very much so.
But there are a lot of subtle triggers that it's interesting to explore.
It's very interesting to explore, and I think it's perhaps the unusual triggers are potentially harder to explore at least from a personal perspective, because you can just imagine someone trying to explore the reason why they would get triggered in JB with the shame that comes with that, and they're like, oh, what? I'm such a fool. I'm such an idiot. I shouldn't get. No one. This doesn't happen to anyone. That resistance blocking that ability to explore. Yeah,
and also there were some people like with the veterans, for example, they would have that very strongly. Like you got to be, if you can't be weak, you can't show emotion, all that sort of stuff. So, and that would come back to sort of certain role models, parents, fathers, maybe especially
I see.
things like that, moral officers. So having some understanding about those, I mean, is that harsh, got to be tough on all occasions, and I grew up in that environment also, typical for baby boomers, corporate punishment and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah, wow.
So, so understanding that the origins of that and the societal family aspects, culture around that is important too, and say, well, that's part of your culture, it's part of your generation, you're not going to give that up.
Yep.
Not going to wimp out all of a sudden or something like that, mate,
Yeah.
Don't come the raw prawn. But anyway, so but you don't have to, but the understanding about it, that's maybe okay under normal circumstances, maybe it's too severe under normal circumstances.
Yep.
It's understanding where that message comes from a bit, without giving up on the important aspects of that, which is part of your now identity, is also important in that part there too.
Right.
And it can then switch more to the relational aspects
Yep.
of that message. So that's very important to perhaps steer gently to the direction.
Yeah.
Do you find, if you know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
If that harsh, where's that come from?
Yeah. Because it would there'd be a significant degree of conflict that can manifest in relationship. When people are traumatized by different sorts of things, and when people are traumatized by things, or triggered by things, I should say, that the other person does.
Yes.
That's just a part of who they are, or a part of I can imagine the conflict that would arise.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
With that trauma, those triggers and those traumas, are there different sorts of, like I just imagine if someone was raped in a park, for example, I can't imagine how, like most people would look at that situation and be like, of course you were going to be traumatized by this, to normalize the situation with each other. Obviously, like resistance and shame and wanting to forget that would arise, but because trauma is so subjective, and people can be traumatized from at the age of 6 when a little school kid called them ugly.
Yeah.
Or like for I'll tell you, for me, for example, I used to have these constant fears about the supernatural and ghosts and all this sort of stuff, and I never felt comfortable normalizing it within myself or with other people, because it's almost like a funny trigger to be so scared and not be able to talk and not be able to sleep with the lights on until I was like 23. Because I shouldn't be traumatized by something that happened to me like that when I was a kid, but I was. But I just imagine that for something that seems objectively traumatizing, would be a lot easier, I imagine, for people to be like, of course.
Yeah, well, that's where the societal thing comes in.
Yeah.
And I think if you've, it also comes into sort of the family community rules that you've grown up in.
Yeah.
So if you've come from a sort of a bit of a situation where you've perhaps been a bit of a rebel, your family's been a bit hippie or something like that or whatever, maybe less the case. They say, well, hang on, that's your experience, and who cares what they think?
Yes.
Roy Carlton supporters, they don't know what they're on about that.
Yeah. For all our international listeners, we're going very AFL here today. No, it's good. It's good.
Okay.
Carlton, you don't want to go for Carlton.
Okay.
Collingwood's good, apparently.
Okay. I don't want to start a blue here, but anyway.
No.
Look, but that's kind of like sort of if you're in a situation where this is how things are supposed to be. So,
Yes.
Sometimes like the boarding school scenario, the boys' school. I won't mention particular private schools or anything like that. So if you're in that situation where this is how things are, we do this. This is our lifestyle. Keeping up appearances. That's pretty much almost regimented, and that can be certainly the case. If you come from a sort of more of a sort of a diverse family situation, that may be less the case. And I think there's quite a bit of research about those early childhood things, that like the movie ratings, and very traumatic for kids. They can't necessarily differentiate between. And we do an interview, I think it was Panorama or something a few years ago, about talking about even in adolescence, some of the things that people are exposed to through the media, the news, seeing someone shot in front of you when they're talking about biscuits 1 minute, then someone's being blown up in front of you the next without any warning. That can be very traumatic.
Yeah, it's so unprepared.
So that's I think there's more of an appreciation of that.
Mm.
There was say 10 years ago. It's a funny thing how things go. Like in the 50s, there'd be like even before my time, maybe. So there'd be a lot of censorship about being very careful about what you're exposed people to. That's went for a period of time, probably blaming the baby boomers on this, the 70s, right? So things just let's throw everything out, mate. It's just it all hang loose.
Yeah.
That's but within that, it's so important to realise the delicacy and the vulnerability of children. They can't necessarily differentiate between objective reality and subjective reality and fantasy, and it's all part of the fantasy, or it's real or that real. If you see crocodiles coming at you in a strange place in the city,
yeah,
like there was a movie about that once, came out of the sewers. Or something.
Yeah, that's right. Crocodiles and alligators in the sewers or something.
Yeah, they're a worry. I tell you, So anyway,
sharks and tornadoes
for children, they can't necessarily differentiate between that. So it's quite reasonable to put that into a traumatic type category for a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
You could actually explore further around, was there anything else happening that's around that time too, in terms of relational aspects, but it may not be often. You always want to explore that anyhow.
Yeah.
But the movie situation, they could do it.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Scary stuff. Some of this.
Well, mine was, do you know what was funny? And I've just, when you said that, what was going on at the time, I always go back into that. And I'm obsessed with Carl Jung, so I'm like, okay, well, what happened there? But,
See a younger half. That's all right.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah,
okay.
But it was watching a ghost from Scooby Doo. My dad and my sister and I would always watch Scooby Doo.
Good Scooby Doo.
Good Scooby Doo. Yeah,
love the voice.
Oh, it's the best.
It
was the 1969 Scooby Doo. Where Are You? Like the serious Scooby Doo. But then I had a sleep paralysis nightmare that night, and I always remember it. And I think that's what triggered the. I can sleep the light off now, so I'm happy with that. But just
was that around Scooby Doo? You say
it was about the sleep paralysis ghost, where I woke up unable to move, and you can look into kind of the hormonal reasons as to why that occurs. But it was the ghost from Scooby Doo choking me when I was young, and it was choking me like that, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't talk, and I wasn't really good at talking.
So was there a ghost in Scooby Doo on that?
There was a ghost. There was a phantom. So it's the episode is called "A Night for a Fright Is No Delight."
Oh, okay.
And it was the phantom cartoon ghost in that episode.
Right.
And then the dream was I woke up being unable to move with the phantom pressing on my chest.
Oh, okay. And how old were you then?
I would have been I had it reoccurringly over a good 5-10 years.
Oh, okay.
But when I first saw it, probably would have been about 8 or so.
Okay.
So quite young.
So it's probably quite a vivid animation by the sound of it.
Very, very vivid. Yeah. And I've had sleep paralysis. I don't have it anymore ever since I started to keep a dream journal and analyse my dreams.
Okay.
But, if you're looking back on dreams and things, I would have this dream when I lived in Bali 6 months ago, where I was playing footy and I was trying to get to the goal. Always trying to get to the goal. You
were actually living in Bali.
Yeah, just 6 months ago. Yeah.
Okay.
And you were
playing football in Bali.
I wasn't playing football in Bali. I gave up football in 2014. But the dream was the set and setting. I'm playing football in Bali.
Yeah.
And I'm going, and then all of a sudden I'm choking, and I can't stop choking.
Okay.
Devil's Snare from Harry Potter's wrapping around me. One time it was Lady Gaga's legs wrapping around me, and I always wake up in a fright.
Yeah.
And I, looked at the symbols of the dream and interpreted it, and I had that it clicks moment.
Oh, okay.
And I remembered a time when I was playing football in 2014.
Oh, okay.
And one of the opponents had me in a chokehold. We were fighting at the bottom of the scrum, the tackle, and he had me in a chokehold. And I remember...
It was like rugby, was it, or something?
Well, it was football. I shouldn't have said scrum, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
But it was the bottom of the tackle.
I got it.
It was the bottom of the tackle, and he had me in a chokehold, And I remember the panic at the time. And for whatever reason, that was just pushed into the unconscious, and the dream was...
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, so in that scenario there, that could be a traumatic event.
Yes. I mean,
we often dismiss that, especially amongst the guys being...
I can move on.
Oh, no, but that why should that be dismissed from being a traumatic event? Look, I did a doco with... 774 a few years ago with Rochelle Hunt. You might want
Yeah.
to look at that.
Yeah.
That's just on the internet. Footballer post-traumatic stress.
Amazing. Yeah.
So just have a look at it on the internet. Look out there.
Yeah.
And that just, we were really highlighting there. I've done a bit of work with elite sports people as well, here and there, and it's funny because of that mindset, like we talked about before, the child and the early childhood experience and societal evaluations.
Yeah.
That sort of things that go on in footy, sport in general,
Yep.
can be very traumatic. And what's the difference between if you're actually being choked by walking around the back streets of Fitzroy by being mugged?
Yep.
Okay. The sort of personality you're dealing with there is probably not as friendly as the one you're dealing with in footy, or you don't know sometimes. But still, the actual event, your life is at risk, your body's at risk. And even when you're not being choked, some of the sort of the injuries you go through
Oh yeah.
can be pretty horrific. And you could, perhaps even on an unconscious level, you could feel, yeah, like, are you going to survive this at this minute or this second? But then you've got to get on with the game and so forth. And so that could be a traumatic event absolutely for sure.
Yeah.
And also the emotional aspects. We're talking about this sort of sport. You sort of, I think also especially it's developmentally centred. Like I think at a certain age, perhaps we see ourselves in this being able to achieve this and being able to achieve that, and
Yeah.
wanting this and wanting that, and we don't fully understand our identity. That's part of the Erickson psychosocial stages. We were trying to describe the quest.
Yep.
Vulnerable time. If you don't succeed, if you don't win this game, you're nothing. Sort of stuff. That's often the case. What people feel when they're playing sport,
Yes.
especially in Australian culture, perhaps.
Yep. Definitely.
So those emotional and physical experiences can be quite traumatic.
Yeah.
So that would make sense. Your dream after that.
Kept happening, mate.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
And also, in terms of inoculating people against having traumatic stress, rather than if you sort of give yourself a bit of that SAS training, they say, well, this is dangerous and it can be traumatising. If you're aware of that, perhaps you're less likely to get it, actually.
Well, this is what I've been really
It's
fascinated.
a paradox, like
Yeah.
if someone in the street tries to beat you up, you know that what's a traumatic, victims of crime, right?
Yeah.
On the footy field, we're sort of, that sort of stuff, this is not a traumatic scenario, so your brain hasn't caught up with that. But that actually, because your brain hasn't caught up with it, that means you're more fragmented. Therefore, because you're more fragmented, you're more likely to have dissociation. Because you're more likely to have dissociation, you're more likely to have PTSD symptoms and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm really thank you for bringing that up. I looked into the study about the differences in the physiological changes between embracing fear and then having fear happen to you, or have that unresponsive fear. And they're completely different.
Yeah.
And what I think is, what I've found, at least anecdotally, is that experience was traumatizing for me. Bringing it to conscious awareness and then working through that has actually helped.
Yeah.
But now I do jiu-jitsu,
Oh, right.
where
Okay.
bracing someone who's actually trying to choke you out, and I love it.
Yeah.
Because it gives me a sense of purpose. It builds on that confidence, and
I understand
think
that.
those two.
I've done a bit of judo, so I do.
Oh, yeah,
understand.
right.
Yeah, bit of boxing as well.
Oh, right.
Not recently, but
Yeah.
also in the past. But I still understand the concepts, and I still muck around a little bit occasionally.
Yeah.
But I do understand it. I think it's fantastic, and Vanderkolk recommends that too. And you doing that, embracing it, as you're saying, and that would be very, very healing, and
It's incredible.
and good fun.
It is great fun, but that embracing, because this is where I always want to make sure I'm staying top of when I talk about trauma with people, is that, identifying the root cause and respecting how easily we can be traumatized, but then also recognizing that we actually have a bit of free will and agency, and we can embrace fears and widen that circle.
And what you're saying fits well and truly into the Gestalt model.
Right.
That they talk about. Part of the idea and the Schoenstrom model, the idea is that we sort of say, well, we reject parts of ourselves we don't like or things we're afraid of. Yeah. And you embrace it as you're describing, and there's especially maybe especially if there's a physical element involved. It's like integrating the self. It's recognizing the self and valuing the self and honoring the self.
Yeah.
Warts and all, so to speak.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah.
Michael, I wanted to ask, because another area of psychology that I like is a little bit into subjectivity as well. How has your research and your study actually helped you as a person? like come to understand yourself more? You know, maybe your sort of thing over the years. And
Well, I think it's knowledge. I mean, I come from the point of view of being an arts graduate,
Yeah.
rather than coming from a strict science point of view into psychology. That it's all part of it. It's all part of the journey. So my work through the arts of philosophy and history of philosophy of science, in particular, sociology, psychology, it's all helped me understand myself in relationship with the universe. And I think history is so important. I think it's one of the things that I found really, really valuable is understanding the human journey in history. So I think the models and frameworks and the learning, teaching as a teacher is all part of what we do when we act out from a person in the environment, and we act with others, and we share our journey, we hear other people's journeys, and we can relate our own experience to theirs and vice versa. So that's all part of self-growth,
yes,
self-knowledge, and understanding.
yeah,
That's the way I look at things.
that's awesome. Yeah, Michael, I know we've got to get you out of here at some point, but I'm definitely keen to have you on the show regularly. And
Sure.
you're just a wealth of knowledge, and I honestly can't thank you enough
My
for
pleasure.
sitting down with me. It's
Cheers.
brilliant. It was awesome. Where can people find you, and if there's anything you'd like to talk about now?
Oh, well, basically, if you just check out Michael Birch on the internet, Michael Birch Psychologist on the internet, I'll be pretty much, well, the details are down there, so they can, it's the main thing, just Michael Birch Psychologist, I'll be down there. They can see my details, my emails, etc. It's all down there
Yeah,
on the Google.
on the Google.
Mr. Google, yeah.
Mr. Google.
So, yeah.
Yes, not WebMD. We'll move away from WebMD.
Yeah, that's it.
Michael, mate, thank
Pleasure.
you so much.
Pleasure.
That was awesome.
Pleasure.
Absolutely loved it. And peace, guys. Love you all.